Welcome back. I want to continue the conversation that we've been having for quite a while, and it is one, obviously, that finds itself all about pandemic. It's not a boring topic, it's real, it's every day, it's stuff we all deal with. And as you know, synagogues are probably stage 5. So let's talk a little bit about where things are at, what we're thinking, how we're feeling. And remember, this is the last Shabbat of the year, so to speak, before summer comes to Beth Torah. And summer means something a little bit different. The service will still be here. You probably will have me live to some extent. Not sure exactly what it means, but of course we'll have live services and it will be interesting and compelling as always. The first thing I want to talk about is how we are thinking of the future, because that is the core thrust of what I want to talk about today in the sermon, by way of update. So I had a wonderful conversation with a young man named Josh Tapper. Josh is doing a lot of great work at Stanford, and he's part of an oral narrative of the COVID pandemic in Toronto. And he called me to have a conversation, and it was a very strange experience initially. Not strange in the big sense, but the first interaction, first part of it was, I'm not calling to ask you how things are or what you're doing. I'm calling to ask you to talk to me about everything that is going on in the background so that years from now, 100 years, whatever the time frame is, when scholars, researchers, individuals want to learn what was it like during the pandemic in Toronto, you, that means me, will be on the record as having talked about the insight of the backstory around the pandemic. Because statistics and conversations will be there, but of the Jewish community, what's happening in synagogues? How has it changed you? How has it changed the synagogue? How has it changed the life of clergy? How has it changed individuals? What were the challenges? What are the issues? What goes on behind the scenes when a board has to make decisions to open, to close? So I had a chance for 2 hours to speak in a way I've never really thought of before, which is I am speaking for the record so that 100 years from now, just like people are doing with the flu epidemic of 1918, they're going to do the research on what happened behind the scenes as opposed to just the story. And the Ontario Jewish Archives has undertaken, while we're in pandemic, to collect this information and to collect it for perpetuity, for the long term. They're obviously collecting videos, music, materials, things that have happened here. But this was a rare thing where you get to speak about something that you know will outlast you, will be useful hopefully in the future. And it really gave me pause to start thinking about what happens after. We agreed to speak 12 months from now to catch up and see where we were, where we are. Was I correct in some of my prognostications? Was I more than correct? Was I wrong? How did we do? Did we get it right? Where are we going to be at? And I started thinking both short term, where we are, where will we be 12 months from now? And where will we be 100 years from now if this information, this data becomes useful to somebody? So these oral projects are fairly common, but I was really pleased to be part of it. And in anticipation of a year from now, of course, I hope the answer is, well, it's gone and we're back to normal. But that's what I want to talk about today. Dreams or nightmares, what comes after pandemic? But about reopening. I want you to think of one word, a word you might be familiar with. It's Florida. We're not Florida, not by a far stretch. But Florida has reached in one day an unheard of number of almost 9,000 cases in one day. That's one word, Florida. Then you can also think about Texas, and you can think about Arizona, and then if you want to think a little more globally, you could think about Kingston, not far from us, one beauty shop, one person. I don't know, I don't have the exact number. I don't remember, was it 30 infections or a lot of people connected to one little story? It only takes one person. And that is why Israel is about to go into lockdown. Because the combination of government policy, which is understandable, every government makes their own decisions, the combination of the Israeli mentality, which for some is whatever, and for many it's not whatever, but following the policy, necessity, need, relief. They had a great lockdown, they really clamped down on it, they almost quashed it, and they opened up. And now they're going to close. Or a lot of it's going to close. You know that something is going on when ultra-Orthodox health organizations are asking, begging the government to bring in the army to close their synagogues. Unprecedented, unimaginable. During the first wave, that would not have happened, but now it's happening. They're saying, we know that helps. And when Israel's infection rate jumps by 425 in 24 hours, with 5 more deaths, and they're a small country, they're going to go into lockdown. My mother told me that my nephew, who got married recently, was supposed to go back to Israel, but his wedding and his schedule made it so that he couldn't go. So he had to go to Lakewood, which is where the yeshiva is, the alternate yeshiva. And then they came here. Now they're in quarantine, and they have to go back. And the kid is basically stateless, homeless, because he was supposed to go to Israel and he can't. Even though when you go to Israel, up until recently, there wasn't even a quarantine anymore, and that's part of the conversation. We know what happened to New Zealand. New Zealand was free until they let some people out of quarantine a little bit early, and boom. So I'm not suggesting that that's where we're at. I think a really good job has been done here. I think a lot of people have given away of their own personal comfort and time and effort to really keep a balance between lockdown and social distancing and masks. Every day you'll read stories about all the people who are not wearing masks, and I know just anecdotally, you can go out and see it for yourself. Maybe if there's a second wave, you know what's coming next, which is mandatory masks, which is the way it is in many places now. Maybe it will be everywhere. Masks have been proven to be one of the most effective things against transmission. But you have to wear your mask properly. You can't have your nose sticking out of it. You can't take it off when you want to talk to someone. You have to use it properly. You have to learn how to use it, and it's uncomfortable. I used a face shield the other day just to see what it feels like. It's better, but I don't know, is that the future? Is that the new normal? Whatever it is, we're going to do it. I just urge a lot of caution. At funerals, the rule was 50 people. They changed it from 10 to 50 overnight. So they had funerals with 50, graveside, and it was a balagan. It was a mess. You can't handle 50 people at a graveside. It's very hard. If everybody is strictly law-abiding, maybe. But it's not that way. And when people are gathering around a gravesite, which is fairly small, to hear someone maybe who's not speaking loudly, and trying to hear and trying to participate and trying to show love and respect at a distance, it gets challenging. And who groups with who, and how does that work? And the rules were changed back by the cemetery associations, 20 people. Unveilings are now being made available to those who are most in need. That would be through each individual cemetery. You have to contact them. But still, they're trying very hard to keep people apart. But it's hard. And the more we focus on the possibility, 30% of synagogues, patios are open. Patios are open. And then they say, but if it rains while you're on the patio, you know what you can do? You can go inside. Oh, okay. How does that make sense? I'm not an advocate for avoiding the new stages, but I'm advocating within each stage, within stage 2, learn the rules, not just what you imagine them to be. There's been a lot of thought that's gone into it. Some of it may prove to be correct, some of it may prove to be frivolous, but at the end of the day, you know if you're being safe or if you're not. But there's no doubt that the future is going to change. And the question I'm going to be asking today is dreams or nightmares. I have grave concerns for public transit. I think it's going to be a long time before people freely take public transit, unless there's an absolute mask requirement. And even then, the recommendation, unfortunately, is that Uber or taxis are not really safe, even if you're wearing a mask. They're not the safest place because they don't have great ventilation. So any place that is not well ventilated, such as airplanes, the same reason we got sick on airplanes for many years is probably the same reason that you wouldn't want to travel if someone was actively infected. And until we have really great testing that is instant, because temperature checks don't really help. Not really. And I'm not a science expert. Forgive me if I'm wrong, but that's my understanding. So we have challenges in terms of what is going to happen in the very near future, and we'll find out pretty soon, because we're a little behind, and we've done a pretty good job, and most people are doing a pretty good job, and most systems are working, but there are problems, and there are cracks. And for right now, the ICUs are stable, and the medical system can handle it, and we hope it stays that way. I really don't want us to become like Florida, Texas, where they're clearing out the ICUs right now because they know it's coming. They're closing the bars. Well, it might be a little too late. There are other challenges. People are talking about outdoor services. Well, I don't need to tell you about weather, but let's say people go in their car. I don't know how it's going to work because I haven't really thought about in too much depth. I can think of all the problems. I can't really find a solution there. But let's say you have an outdoor service. Mike Cole is finalizing with the City of Toronto a place of worship task force, which was the work begun a few years ago to keep houses of worship safe from attacks of all sorts, whether they be graffiti or physical, or, I don't need to go into the fact that when you're a target, you always have to be vigilant. Our synagogue wasn't designed with very large planters along the front streetscape or along the side. There were other features, but not those. Those came from the city where they put these huge concrete planters there to avoid a driving attack. It's subtle. They're full of flowers, but they're part of this task force. And Yasher Koach, thank you to Mike for driving this. I know he was here with Ralph Goodale and Marco Mendicino. They were talking at the time about security and funding and so on. And if you have any comments or participation, now's the time, because the task force is finishing its work at City Hall. You can get in touch with them through their website. But how would you imagine an outdoor service that would be safe? Part of being indoor is that you can protect yourself. Outdoors, it's possible. They do it all the time, but it's a whole new challenge. Now, I've always found it curious that we enjoy 3 homelands, obviously, Texas, Israel, and Canada. But there's a 4th, which a lot of people have enjoyed for a very long time, called cruise ships. Where they get to go and visit all kinds of places while living in their little homeland called a ship. And obviously, as we know, one of the first indicators that COVID was coming was cruise ships. That's what we started to follow. We realized this is real, this is a pandemic, these people are coming home, quarantines, etc. Ships left at sea, at port, couldn't get home for a long time. Cruise ships, in my mind, are what you should be looking at when you look at the cruise ship industry groups. And they have said that at the earliest, voluntarily at the earliest, they don't think they're going to be sailing until September. Which probably means now with the second wave in the United States, it's going to be pushed even further. And they're going to put in methodology, because if you allow someone on a ship and it's a 20 or 14-day cruise, you know what that means if they're infected. So if we follow the cruise ship industry as a model of close spaces where you could theoretically socially distance, but it's probably a place in which the rules will be loosened a little bit due to people just being in too close proximity or bumping in the hall or talking, some people not following rules or buffets, whatever they want to do on cruise ships, entertainment and so on, they obviously understand that it's not happening right now. And it's probably very optimistic for them. I don't know. I'm not a travel agent, and I know some of you are. I hope that your industry comes back, but it will take a lot of change, both in medicine and science and just numbers to make it happen. And I really hope that people get the opportunity to travel again and visit their many homelands. But for now, think of the cruise industry and say to yourself, is Shul very different than a cruise where people come, the rules feel a little looser because it's intimate, it's warm, it's family, it's together, it's about social engagement, it's food, it's warmth, it's handshaking, it's hugging, it's I haven't seen you in such a long time, it's a little bit of entertainment, there's speakers, there's movement. We're not that different. The seats are pretty close, like the cabins are pretty close, and so on. Hallways are a little narrow, washrooms are a little bit smaller. Just think of it in those terms, and that will be a good guideline for where the thinking is. Now, we're not taking our cue from the cruise industry as to whether we reopen on high holidays, but I am listening to all of you, and I've heard from a lot of people. And the one thing I've heard which is so consistent is essentially, I know you probably could find a way to open up a little bit. We could, but please don't, because we're going to have to choose not to come. That's what I'm hearing. I have to tell you, I'm not convinced that for my health I should be in a service. I'm okay, but I don't want to be not okay. And why would I multiply the risk when I don't have to? So have to is an important consideration when you deal with a conservative community versus an Orthodox community. But if Orthodox Jews understand that synagogues are one of the worst places for transmission and they want them shut down, kal vachomer, it should be obvious to us that the place we go to be safe is home, not the synagogue. Everything is still up in the air. As I've mentioned earlier, we're waiting for data, we're looking at numbers, we're waiting for guidance. The numbers in Ontario have dropped significantly. But what happens when we get comfortable with the drop? And we don't declare ourselves pandemic-free, but we say, we're really, really good. The numbers now are consistently at 20 a day. Okay, and then what happens? If we reopen, do the numbers start to go like Florida? Or is it really gone and we flatten the curve? We don't know. Do you want to do that experiment at the high holidays? We're talking about the experiment of sending kids back to school. How's that going to work? We got guidance from my daughter's school yesterday. I'm thinking about it. What does that really mean? That really means that if there is an outbreak at school, one kid from one family who had contact with someone else, who had contact with someone else, and so on, contact tracing, we could get a call saying, hey, you know what? We're closing the school down for 14 days, or your classroom is closed for 14 days. We all got to go get tested, and so on. That's probably what's going to happen. Does that mean they shouldn't go to school? No, we know that there's a lot of conversation about the mental health benefits of kids being in school, parents needing kids in school. There's a whole risk assessment that has to go along with these things. But school and shul are not necessarily the same thing. And as you know, I have promised you, and I think it is evident from how we interact here and how we interact during the week and how we interact with our membership, that we will make high holidays as meaningful and connected as possible given the distance and the non-physical presence that we have. The best I can tell you is I will bring my heart and soul here and give it to you. And hopefully that's enough, because I don't want to give you my life. Let's see. We'll wait and see where we end up. And I know we have great wisdom in our shul. We have great experts. We have a lot of medical health experts advising us. We have an excellent executive and board, and they are steering us in the right path, and we will follow their guidance at the end of the day. And now a little bit about dreams or nightmares. So I'm wondering, in my conversation I had with Josh, what does the future look like? We didn't get to that. Maybe a year from now we'll start talking. What does the future look like? What have we learned from pandemic? I've said even early on, please spare me the tales of, well, this pandemic, it turned out, was a great thing. Well, that's for later, not for right now. Right now, it's not a great thing. I don't care how good it is for you, it's not good. So spare me the, look how good God is. He gave us pandemic, so we, hey, shut it. Look how good people are that they're putting their masks on is what I really want to hear. Look how good I am that I'm actually helping out and being a hero to the less fortunate. That's all I want to hear. I don't want your moralizing or your lessons or your theology, or don't insert God in my personal struggles. Right now I just want to know, are you helping or are you hurting? But I do feel it's right to talk about the ways in which we go forward without talking about whether pandemic has been good or bad for us. It's not a judgment, it's more of an opportunity. I got an email from a wine store in Lakewood, New Jersey. I have a brother and sister who live in Lakewood. It's a very, very heavily ultra-Orthodox town. If any of you are familiar with it, there are a lot of challenges in Lakewood between ultra-Orthodox and non. There's real estate issues, there's poverty, there's all kinds of... Inevitably, when you have an enclave of very similar-minded people that are trying to live within existing systems, you're going to have clashes and conflict. But Lakewood also started off as pretty much an ascetic Lithuanian yeshiva, post-war yeshiva, that was not about luxury or fancy or money. It was about Torah study, dedicating lives to Torah study and Torah teaching, and raising young men and women who would go on to form ultra-Orthodox homes focused on Torah study, observance of mitzvot. But over the years, Lakewood, like every other place, has its ideals adjusted. Money comes from other places. People come in, they buy, they build, they have beautiful homes. There's the rich and the poor. Like in every community, there's a strata of who can afford it and who can't, who can sit and learn for their entire life and who has to go out and get a job or teach or whatever, who's supported by their in-laws and who's not. And then there's the wealth that comes with people. People have wealth. New York is a very wealthy city. People come and they have a wine store. And in the wine store, a lot of the community have developed a very, very strong taste and affection for high quality kosher wines. And I know you might be laughing at me, but there are truly excellent, super high priced kosher wines. I had a bottle here that was valued at over $400. It was a gift. And it's from Israel. It's a great wine. And there are many great wines. So what you think about kosher wine, it's not Manischewitz. This is the real deal. And if you want to go online and see what I'm talking about, it's called Wine on 9, because Highway 9 runs through Lakewood. Wine on 9. And what did they announce? You ready? In taking a small step to reassess our lifestyle values, Wine on the 9 will no longer carry wines in excess of $99, whiskeys in excess of $249. And they're having a sale. They're getting rid of all their expensive stock. Let's get rid of it. So this store, I don't know who the owners are. I don't know their history, but they have decided they want to take a small step towards the dream of the pandemic, which is that when we emerge from this, we can reevaluate our luxury lifestyles. We just don't need wine over $100. It's just not right. And they're putting their money where their mouth is. They're reevaluating, and they're getting rid of it. So I don't know who they are. They might, I assume they're Jewish. I assume they might be ultra-Orthodox. But they are clearly looking at post-pandemic and saying, how do we make this better? I've talked about it before, and I'll just mention it briefly. I am not in favor of professional sports leagues reopening just to have a playoff and have a... I'm not. Because even though we're in stage 2, I don't think here we're in stage 2. I think we're still stuck in lockdown. And I think the overt display of vulgar luxury, where we spent and gave away our time freely and engaged in all kinds of distractions, but especially in the world of professional sports where the greed is extraordinary. And by the way, I always feel I have to qualify. There are wonderful sentiments and wonderful feelings, and nothing could be greater than the way Toronto came together when the Raptors won. But you know as well as I do, that sports fans are people who basically get to touch the Ferrari once in a while or look at it. That's what you do when you buy a ticket. You get to watch the Ferraris. Very few people making huge amounts of money for corporations that make huge amounts of money, and they give a lot of charity, and they do a lot of good. But under normal times, I would not say a word about that because I enjoy sports. It's a great distraction. It's a great engagement. And there are great stories there. I gave a sermon about Kawhi Leonard's shot. I think there's extraordinary value in professional sports. But the idea that that's going to come back and somehow create the holistic sense that things are improving, they're better, I don't think it's the right time, and I don't think that people are really ready. But even if I'm wrong, I also think many people who formerly enjoyed that will no longer. The taste of this kind of luxury has been lost. And for some people, that's a nightmare. The pandemic is going to change our value systems. And for some, that's a dream. There are other opportunities out there. One of them is this interesting idea that women's hockey launched during the pandemic. And I don't really want to exaggerate the conversation about sports. It's just one thing that people, I think, are not that interested in. My sense is that people are into luxury that changes their ability to function within a pandemic. The sales of bicycles has gone up dramatically, especially e-bikes, which are not cheap. Why? Because people don't want to take transit. They finally made the decision also not to take their cars. They use it so rarely now. Suddenly people realize that they rarely need their car, especially if they're going to work from home from now on. What do I need to spend money on a car? I live downtown. I get an e-bike. I spend the money once and it lasts me for 10 years. All I got to do is plug it in the wall and spend $100,000 on a lock. But that's a whole other story. So the NBA is planning on reopening at Disney. They're going to take all their players, put them in a big bubble. And if you start to read the story about what's happening at the NBA, you realize that even the leadership of the NBA that is talking about all the teams playing in Disney in the bubble, they're hedging. They realize that this could easily turn into a nightmare. Some players have tested positive. To their credit, the NBA have said, nobody has to play if they don't want. No penalty, you just don't get paid. And some players feel especially because the league is heavily black in terms of its makeup, racial makeup of players. A lot of them said, and this is similar to what I said before about people not wanting ultra luxury during pandemic, a lot of them said, at a time where we're protesting Black Lives Matter, we're talking about race and disunity in the United States, I should go play sports and earn millions of dollars while my fellow people are struggling. That's their sentiment, not mine, but that is what they're saying. They don't want to participate. It's their way of mourning the change in society. There's a Los Angeles Lakers player named Avery Bradley, and when he was asked if he would play, here's what he said, and this should resonate with all of us. I can't imagine making any decision that might put my family's health and well-being at even the slightest risk. And he said, no, thank you. I'm not playing. So the NBA is part of the pandemic dream or nightmare. Which one will it be? Will they start playing, have a diagnosis? We know that young people now under 20 can die of COVID. It happened. Basketball players are extremely fit, but what happens? What happens when you're in Disney with all these players, coaches, and teams, and someone gets sick? Someone violates the curfew. Someone sneaks in a relative. Someone has it, it's not detected. That's part of it. The other part is sports going to have a bad taste in our mouth once this is all over? Because I do believe, and this is an important note to the Jewish community, I do believe that we will be changed. We don't know entirely how, but things that previously were great will be looked upon by many people as over the top. That's because the pandemic will have changed us. And the Jewish community needs to hear this message. One of the most important ideas we carry with us is that there's a uniqueness in our history and our narrative. And that is what drives so much of what we do and how we think and how we feel and who we are and our holidays and our relationships and our values and our gatherings. It's about us being Bachar Banu. We are part of a chosenness. We've self-chosen. History has chosen us. Anti-Semites have singled us out, and therefore we feel part of chosen, unique, separate. But that is in a world that has many narratives. The challenge we're going to face is we don't remember a time, and we don't remember the war, but we don't remember a time when the whole world experienced the same disaster at the same time, with the same outcomes, with the same narratives, and because we're all human beings, the same feelings. What does that do to a people that have always held sacred their unique narrative? Will it be subsumed or enhanced by the sensation that is the residue of pandemic? It is a very powerful question. I don't have an answer because I'm not an expert on the future. But I do know that if you ask yourself, will the world have commonality more or less after pandemic? It's obvious. There's a universal commonality that every single person in the world can share. No different than a smile. Smile is a universal language. So will pandemic. So will post-pandemic. So will trauma. So will fear. The entire world is together, not in this together, of this together. And the Jewish narrative has to reimagine itself to include it, but also to understand that there's a world narrative that has similar undertones, and you have to be aware of that when you try to be singular or unique. Nightmare or dream, I don't know. I'm watching. I'm learning, just like you are. Something to consider. When we emerge from pandemic, will we have truly fixed our healthcare system so that people who are elderly don't feel that going to an old age facility is just a recipe for death? Will we? Because now is the time to start thinking about it and doing it. And part of the reason the numbers have gone down dramatically is because long-term health care facilities have, for the most part, quashed the epidemic within their midst. But the fact that it happened is a systemic breakdown, and it needs to be repaired, and it needs to be fixed. And there needs to be legislation that makes it a criminal offense, not just for elder abuse, but for neglect. And the best thing that can happen is that the nursing home industry self-regulates and doesn't wait for government to mandate change. And the government, in turn, cracks down incredibly hard on people who waste elderly's lives in filth and unsanitary conditions. It is unacceptable. The Jewish community has for years, many, many years, always looked towards Baycrest and said, that place is a model to the world. It still is. People come from all around the world to understand elder care. Well, we'd like to see more of the learning happen here and more homes. And I'm sure there are many that are good. I'm not an expert on which ones are the problems. But we do know that when you're a shareholder-driven enterprise, it may cause you to make decisions differently than when you're a care-driven enterprise. Just think about the nightmare or the dream. It would be ideal if any one of us had to be in a long-term healthcare facility that we don't think it's a death sentence. And the world I want to see when it's over looks something like this. A Syrian refugee was airlifted from Cyprus with his infant son to undergo an operation at the Sheba Medical Center. The Israeli embassy in Nicosia made it happen. And he's a Syrian refugee living in Cyprus, and whatever you imagine about a Syrian refugee living in Cyprus, when he got to the land of Israel, he also had imaginations about Israel. But here was a chance for his child to be saved. And what he said is what I want as my dream so we can end some of the nightmare. When asked, how do you feel? He said, I don't care about politics. That is something to aspire to. If we can come together now and remember this, maybe we won't care about politics as much. Maybe we'll do what's right. Maybe we'll be able to seek peace. Maybe if we don't care about politics, we'll find peace. Maybe if we listen to people, individuals, people who will reach out to supposed enemies. I mean, I know it's pie in the sky, but we have the right to dream, right? We're living the nightmare. There's talk amongst ultra-Orthodox communities, how they've all been placed in this jam together of no religious gatherings. Now they're starting to look at each other and going, we're all in this together, maybe we could get along. Because even in the deep, dark corners of ultra-Orthodoxy, there's schism beyond imagination. There's a Talmudic term called Eineni Gores, which means you don't register. And here you have in Israel ultra-Orthodox Haredi black hat Jews who believe in their messianic values about the land and return to land. Then you have Jews who are ultra-Orthodox, but they are Dati Leumi, they're Zionists. And these two groups, Einenu Gores, the Haredi especially, they don't even acknowledge the fact that these are valid ultra-observant Jews because they happen to be Zionists. And it's a longer conversation than this. But the idea that they've started to say, maybe I can be gores you. Maybe I can acknowledge you. This has taught us that we're together. Maybe the dream of pandemic will be that different groups that are in schism for the smallest of reasons can start to be gores one another, can start to register each other's needs. And maybe this story, maybe you missed it, but the United Arab Emirates, not necessarily a friend to Israel, but there's a warming of relationships. And it was announced just yesterday that the UAE, United Arab Emirates, and Israel will jointly cooperate on the fight against coronavirus. I have a lot of dreams about what I'd like to see after pandemic. I don't know when after is, as we've mentioned. I know what during looks like. I know all the good things that have happened during. There are a lot of good things during. But that doesn't make it good. Right now, it's still the nightmare. Even if you're out and about, even if the sun is shining, even if it's fun, even if you're in the pool, even if you're golfing, even if you're with friends, we know this is not real. But when it becomes real, there are dreams that we should not give up on. Because if we do, then this will just remain a nightmare. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Let's go make dreams come true.